What if everything you thought you knew about why Jesus came to earth was only half the truth? For centuries, humanity has been told a beautiful, sacred story, but a story missing its final chapter. You've heard that he came to die for the sins of the world, to redeem what was lost, to bridge the gap between heaven and humanity. But what if his purpose went far beyond redemption? What if the cross wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of something the world was never meant to forget? There's a reason his words felt different, why his presence seemed to bend reality itself. Jesus didn't just come to save humanity from sin, he came to awaken humanity to its divine origin, to remind us of a power so vast, so luminous, that even religion could barely contain it. He came not to create followers, but to ignite creators, not to build a church, but to awaken a kingdom within. And here lies the truth most people never hear. His mission wasn't only about what he did for us, it was about what he came to reveal within us. That we are not broken beings crawling toward grace. We are fragments of eternity, learning to remember who we've always been. This was his hidden purpose, the one buried beneath centuries of ritual and fear. And once you see it, you can never unsee it, because Jesus didn't come to make you worship him. He came to show you what it looks like to become what he was. It began long before Bethlehem, long before a manger or a star, or the whispered prayers of shepherds beneath a cold Judean sky. The purpose that drew Jesus to earth was ancient, older than the first sunrise, older than time itself. It was the echo of a promise made in the silence before creation, a vow between divinity and the human soul. Humanity had fallen asleep, not into sin, but into forgetfulness. We had forgotten who we were, forgotten the divine light that pulsed beneath our flesh. And so, heaven sent not a warrior, nor a king, nor a prophet of wrath. Every heartbeat carried the vibration of what humanity had lost, awareness of its own sacred origin. The people of his time could not see it at first. They saw only a carpenter's son, a man of simple birth and impossible gentleness. But even as a child, there was a stillness in his gaze that unsettled the wise and comforted the broken. When others prayed for deliverance, he seemed to listen to something beyond their words, as though hearing a voice they had forgotten how to recognize. From the beginning, he understood that his path would not lead to acceptance, but to awakening. Awakening, by its very nature, disrupts. It tears through comfort, through certainty, through the fragile illusions that keep the world asleep. That's why his message was never safe. The kingdom of God is within you, he said, and in that one sentence, he dismantled the foundation of every empire built on fear. For if God lives within, then no institution, no priest, no power outside the self could claim dominion over the soul. He wandered through villages where the sick were shunned and the poor forgotten. And he saw not weakness, but divinity hidden under the weight of suffering. When he touched the blind and they saw, it wasn't magic, it was remembrance. When he forgave those condemned by law, it wasn't defiance, it was correction. Each miracle was a parable written in flesh, a whisper saying, "You are not broken, you have simply forgotten what you are." But the world had grown comfortable in its chains. The rulers of his age, both political and religious, could not comprehend a power that could not be bought or controlled. They wanted obedience. He spoke of freedom. They demanded ritual. He offered truth. And truth, to those addicted to control, is the most dangerous force of all. So they watched him, followed him, tried to catch him in contradictions. Yet his answers were never defensive. When asked by what authority he acted, he simply said, "Before Abraham was, I am." To those who heard, it was blasphemy. But to those who felt it, those words were the sound of eternity breaking into time. Still, his purpose was not to confront the powerful directly. His revolution was quieter, more subversive-like, light slipping beneath a door in a locked room. He moved through crowds, speaking to hearts, not hierarchies. To the outcasts, he said, "You are the salt of the earth." To the weary, "You are the light of the world." Every word was a seed planted deep within the soil of human consciousness. He knew some would not understand then, but he also knew that one day, long after the dust of his footsteps had settled, those seeds would awaken and humanity would begin to remember again. Yet, even as his following grew, he carried an ache that no one saw. He knew the danger of revelation too soon. He saw the faces of those who loved him, their faith trembling between awe and fear. And he knew that what he came to reveal might break them before it freed them. For the truth of divinity is not gentle. It strips away every identity, every certainty, every illusion of separation. To awaken the divine within humanity, he would have to show them what it looked like to lose everything and still remain whole. That's why the cross was never a tragedy, was a teaching, but that understanding would come later. For now, he walked the dusty roads with quiet purpose, knowing each step brought him closer to both the darkness and the light that would change the world forever. One evening, beneath a violet sky, he sat alone on a hillside. The city lights below shimmered faintly, like dying stars. His disciples slept nearby, their dreams restless, filled with echoes of a truth they could not name. Jesus closed his eyes and whispered to the silence, "They will not understand me, not yet. But someday they will remember." And as the night wind brushed across his face, it carried with it the faintest echo of a promise made before time began. "You will awaken them, even if it costs everything." And he smiled, knowing it would. The crowds began to follow him. Though few understood what they were truly drawn to, they came for healing, for hope, for the possibility that this man might change the world around them. But what he sought to change was far deeper, the world within them. He spoke in riddles, not to confuse, but to protect truth from those who would twist it. Each parable was a door left ajar, waiting for the brave to step through. "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field," he said, and though they nodded, few realized he was not speaking of a place beyond the clouds, but of something buried beneath their own ribs. The people wanted miracles. He gave them reflection. They asked for signs. He gave them sight. When he healed, he told them, "Your faith has made you whole. Not my power, but your faith." In that small distinction lay the entire purpose of his coming. He was not here to display divinity. He was here to awaken it in everyone he met. For centuries, humanity had looked to the heavens for God. But he came to point inward, to whisper the unthinkable. "You are not separate. You never were." This was the beginning of his hidden ministry, the quiet awakening that ran beneath the surface of every teaching. He began to speak to his disciples in ways that unsettled them. "You will do the works I do," he said, "and greater works than these." They looked at one another, baffled. How could anyone surpass the miracles of the Son of God? But Jesus smiled, knowing they still saw him as an exception, not an example. That was humanity's blindness, its refusal to believe that the divine could ever wear the face of the ordinary. As his words spread, so did the unease of those in power. The temple priests saw their influence slipping through their fingers, replaced by something they could not control: faith without fear. Rome, too, began to take notice. To them, any man who stirred hearts without swords was more dangerous than an army. Yet Jesus walked on, untouched by fear, for he knew that resistance was not a sign of failure, it was proof that truth had begun to move. But even within his circle, confusion grew. The disciples argued about rank, about who would sit at his side when the kingdom came. They still imagined thrones and crowns, not understanding that the kingdom he spoke of was invisible, eternal, built not in stone but in consciousness. The first shall be last, he told them, and the last shall be first. They nodded, but the words slipped past their understanding. It is always easier to hear than to awaken. One night, by the fire, he turned to them and asked, "Why are you afraid?" The wind rustled through the palms, and the flames danced in his eyes. "Do you not yet see that fear has no place in love? Perfect love casts out fear." He spoke these words softly, but they struck with the force of thunder. The disciples felt something shift inside them, like the faint cracking of stone before a flood. In that moment, they glimpsed what he was trying to show them, that the divine was not something to be worshipped, but something to become aware of. And yet, the closer they drew to truth, the heavier the shadows grew around him. The priests plotted, the empire watched, and the people, those same people who once reached for his healing, began to whisper doubts. How fragile is faith when it is built on spectacle and not spirit? When he spoke of eating his flesh and drinking his blood, most turned away, horrified, unable to grasp the metaphor of union he was offering. He was not calling them to ritual, but to remembrance, to embody what he was, to let divinity live through them. He withdrew then to the mountains, as he often did when the noise of the world grew too loud. Alone beneath the stars, he spoke to the Father not as a servant to a master, but as consciousness communing with itself. "They do not understand," he whispered, "but they will." He saw the centuries ahead, the wars fought in his name, the temples erected to contain what cannot be contained. And still he loved them. Still he forgave, for he knew that the seed of truth, once planted, cannot die. It only waits. From that solitude he descended, not with anger, but with clarity. Every step from that mountain carried the weight of destiny. He knew the end was approaching, but the end was never the end, it was the unveiling. When he told his disciples that he would soon be taken, they begged him to flee. "You cannot die," Peter said. Jesus looked at him, eyes glimmering with both sorrow and peace. "Peter," he replied, "unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." They did not yet see that he spoke of more than himself. He spoke of consciousness, the truth that transformation always demands surrender, that the divine spark within humanity would awaken only through the breaking of illusion. The crucifixion would not be the destruction of his message, it would be its release. And as the shadow of the cross began to lengthen across the horizon of his life, he did not retreat. Instead, he walked forward, carrying within him the certainty that love was greater than death, and that awakening could not be crucified. He had come to earth not to die for humanity's sins, but to die as humanity's illusion and to rise as its remembrance. The true revolution was about to begin. The air in Jerusalem carried a weight that sprang, as though the city itself sensed that history was holding its breath. The narrow streets buzzed with rumor. Some whispered of a prophet, others of a rebel. But Jesus walked through it all in silence, as if time itself were slowing to match his stride. He knew what was coming, though no one else could see it. Not the disciples who clung to him with trembling loyalty, not the priests who plotted in candlelit chambers, not even the crowds who shouted his name one day and would condemn him the next. The drama of destiny was already unfolding, and he moved through it with the calm of one who knew that the cross was not defeat. It was the unveiling of truth in its purest form. As he entered the city on a borrowed donkey, the people threw palm branches at his feet, crying Hosanna. The sound echoed through the narrow walls like thunder, but he did not smile. He looked at them with a deep, sorrowful love, for he knew they were not celebrating truth. They were celebrating a fantasy, a savior who would conquer Rome, not one who would dismantle illusion. He had not come to overthrow an empire, but to expose the invisible prison within every human heart, the one built of fear, guilt, and separation. That night, as shadows fell across the upper room, he gathered his disciples for the last time. The air was heavy with unspoken dread. The candles flickered as though even the light was trembling. He broke bread in silence, then looked into their eyes, each one a reflection of both love and fear. "Do this in remembrance of me," he said, not as an order, but as a revelation. For he knew that remembrance, not ritual, was the key to awakening. To remember him was not to mourn his death, but to recall the divinity he came to mirror in them. When he washed their feet, they protested. How could the master kneel before the servant? But that was the lesson. They had misunderstood divinity as power when it was always humility. "The greatest among you will be the servant of all," he said softly. "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." In that moment, heaven bowed to earth, showing that love's true nature is not dominance, but surrender. And then came the garden. The olive trees swayed in the cold wind, their shadows like ghosts against the moonlit ground. He knelt among them, the weight of the world pressing against his chest. Even in his divinity, he trembled. "Father," he whispered, "if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." But the silence that followed was not rejection, it was understanding. He was not pleading to avoid death. He was confronting the last illusion, the belief that even he was separate from the will of the infinite. And so, through tears and trembling breath, he surrendered fully. "Not my will, but yours be done." In that surrender, something shifted. The fear dissolved. The man became light. From that moment on, he no longer resisted what must be. When the soldiers came with torches and chains, he did not run. Judas approached, his face twisted with the agony of betrayal. But Jesus did not condemn him. He looked into Judas's eyes with compassion that cut deeper than forgiveness. "Friend," he said, "do what you came for." They dragged him through the streets, beaten and bloodied, mocked by those who once cheered his name. And yet, beneath every lash, every insult, every jeer, his eyes remained calm and broken. because he knew the truth no pain could touch, that what was happening was not the end of his mission, but the revelation of it. Every strike against his body was striking the illusion that God and man were ever separate when they nailed him to the cross. The earth groaned. The sky darkened as though creation itself could not bear to witness what humanity was doing to its own reflection. "Father, forgive them," he whispered, "for they know not what they do." Those words were not about mercy alone, they were about perception. For humanity's blindness was never moral, but spiritual. They did not crucify love, they crucified their own recognition of it. And yet, even then, he was teaching. The cross was not an altar of suffering. It was a mirror showing the soul's true nature. He was demonstrating that life cannot be taken from what is eternal, that consciousness cannot die, only transform. "Into your hands I commit my spirit," he said. And with that, the illusion of separation was shattered. When the final breath left his body, the world fell into silence. The veil in the temple tore from top to bottom, as if reality itself had been split open. In that moment, everything he came to reveal was fulfilled not as doctrine, but as vibration. The bridge between heaven and earth was no longer needed, for the two had never truly been apart. Humanity simply had to remember. The disciples scattered, their faith collapsing beneath the weight of despair. To them, it seemed like failure. They had watched the one they believed to be the Son of God die like a criminal. But 3 days later, when the tomb stood empty, they began to understand. For the resurrection was not a reversalit. Jesus did not rise to prove his power over death. He rose to show that death was never real. The resurrection was humanity's first glimpse of its own immortality. When he appeared to Mary in the garden, she reached for him, desperate to hold onto what she had lost. But he stepped back and said, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended." He wasn't rejecting her love, he was guiding her toward the next stage of awakening. He was teaching her, and through her, all humanity, not to hold on to form, but to recognize spirit, not to worship the messenger, but to awaken to the message. And so the truth began to ripple through time. Every age, every soul that would one day hear his name would feel that same stirring, a quiet remembrance that they, too, are made of the same light, that the divine he revealed did not end with him. It began through him, but the world, still clinging to fear, would not let go so easily. The empire of control was not yet done. They would take his words and twist them, build temples of power upon the very truth that was meant to set them free. The next chapter of his mission would not be written in Scripture, but in the human heart. For resurrection was never about one man returning from the dead. It was about the awakening of consciousness itself. And that awakening had only just begun. The world did not end when he ascended, it only began to awaken. For 3 years, Jesus had walked among humanity to plant seeds. For 3 days, he had rested in the silence between worlds. And for 2,000 years, those seeds have been waiting to bloom. But now, in this age of forgetting, his true purpose calls out again quietly, urgently, from beneath the noise of religion and ritual. Because his mission was never to make humanity worship him. It was to make humanity remember itself. In the years after his resurrection, his followers were changed. Not because they had seen a miracle, but because they had felt something living inside them, a fire that no fear could extinguish. The resurrection was not a story they told. It was a state they entered. In their grief, they discovered something astonishing, that he had not left. He was the breath in their lungs, the light in their eyes, the love that compelled them to forgive what they could not understand. They realized that the same presence that once walked beside them now moved through them, and that was the revelation he had come to bring, not the worship of one man, but the awakening of the Christ within every man and woman. But the world was not ready for that truth. The message was too vast, too liberating, too uncontrollable. The empires of men took hold of it, polished it, reshaped it, made it fit within walls and titles and rules. They built cathedrals to honor him, but in doing so, they buried the very kingdom he came to reveal. The living truth became doctrine. The awakening became dogma. Humanity traded revelation for religion, and the quiet voice within became drowned by ritual and hierarchy. And yet, the truth cannot die. It waits beneath every repetition of prayer, behind every yearning for meaning. It whispers through doubt, through suffering, through the strange ache that tells you there's more to life than survival. That whisper is the same one he heard in the desert, the same one that guided his steps through betrayal, through death, through the veil. It is the eternal echo of the divine consciousness saying, I am still here. The hidden purpose of Jesus was never to create a faith, it was to ignite a frequency. He came to awaken humanity to the vibration of unity. To reveal that I and the Father are one was not a statement of superiority, but of identity. Every time you love without condition, every time you forgive without reason, every time you see yourself in another's eyes, you fulfill that purpose. You become what he came to show. He came to remind us that God was never distant, that heaven was never somewhere beyond the sky. Heaven is the state of remembering. It is the consciousness that knows itself as divine while still walking in human form. When he said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he wasn't speaking poetry, he was describing reality. He was telling you that the same light that created stars lives inside your chest, waiting to awaken. And that is why his message still stirs hearts across millennia. Not because of fear, but because something deep within recognizes it as truth. His story lives in you, not as history, but as potential. The crucifixion was the death of illusion. The resurrection was the unveiling of what has always been true. You were never separate. You were never small. You were never unworthy. You were and are divine consciousness experiencing itself through human form. When he ascended, he left no monument, no throne, no army, only a living example of what it means to embody the infinite in flesh. His purpose was not to rule from above, but to awaken from within, to show that love, when fully realized, is not an emotion, it is a frequency that dissolves death, transcends suffering, and unites everything it touches. And so, as the centuries have unfolded, the call remains the same: awaken. Not to a religion, but to remembrance. Not to worship, but to becoming. The second coming is not a future event, it is a present awakening, happening one soul at a time. Every time a human being chooses awareness over fear, forgiveness over vengeance, love over separation, this is the hidden purpose that changes everything. Jesus did not come to save humanity from judgment. He came to save humanity from forgetting. He came to remind us that we are not creatures begging for mercy, We are creators, learning to remember mercy as our nature. He came to collapse the distance between heaven and earth, until the two became indistinguishable within us. And now, the question he asked his disciples echoes once more across time, directed at you. Who do you say that I am? Because when you truly see him not as an idol, but as a mirror, you will realize the answer has always been the same. He is the reflection of what you are becoming. The purpose of Jesus was never to end with his life. It was to begin with yours. When you awaken, when you remember, when you live as the light that you fulfill the reason he came. And then the story is no longer about a man who walked the earth 2,000 years ago. It becomes the story of divinity, walking again through you, through me, through all who dare to remember. For that was the secret he carried through life and death, the truth whispered through eternity. You and I are not separate. We never were.